let us try to move to rationalism in politics and try to talk about the kind of target that Oakeshott has in mind. I think we could start by saying some basic stuff about what rationalism is supposed to be and what many kinds of rationalism are, and then locate where Oakeshott comes into the picture and where the people he attacks come into the picture. So I would say that epistemic rationalism first and foremost is an epistemic theory. It is the view that we can gain knowledge by reason, and reason is supposed to be a non-sensory means of knowing. Now, there are many reasons why someone can be a rationalist, and I count myself as a rationalist in that respect. I want to give you two reasons. One has to do with what we call the deficiency argument. The other has to do with ethics. So when it comes to deficiency arguments, there is surprising agreement with philosophers, which is super rare, that the sense experience, cannot establish necessary truths, like the law of non-contradiction. So when we talk about, as Aristotle was saying, that the law of non-contradiction is something that we know by reason, we intuit it somehow. You could say we have an intuitive grasp of it. Yes.
It can't make sense.
Yes. And we could say that there is a rationalistic tissue in that sense, in the epistemic sense, in thought, because every time that someone utters a contradiction, we interpret this as false. And actually, not only us, the government does it as well. So if for instance, we don't pay our taxes and they ask us, what happened with your tax? And we say, well, I paid it, but I didn't pay it. Or I didn't pay it, but I paid it. Well, that's a contradiction. It makes no sense. And we frequently use the law of non-contradiction in our criticism of other people to say that this is inconsistent, therefore it's false. With radical empiricism, especially of John Stuart
Just as a quick aside there, I think, what was it? How was it phrased? There's a Latin term, but it means from a contradiction, anything follows. And
I think
I can't remember that.
Quod libet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I can't remember. I remember how it follows. Yeah, what the English. But the from a contradiction, anything follows. It means that there's no logical continuation of what's happening.
Yes.
Right, and that's why it seems to be false. It's just for anyone wondering.
Yes.
Like it's because things have a logical progression, and the contradiction destroys the logic, and so you can't make sense of it.
Yes, so. And to anticipate a worry that the law of non-contradiction is not inconsistent with change. It says that a particular thing, a particular entity cannot have contradictory properties in the same sense at the same time.
Yes. So it can't be black and white at the same time.
And empiricists have had a trouble with this. And John Stuart Mill, for instance, that you mentioned, and I think that this is a really interesting thing to point out. He doesn't think that the law of we can know that the law of non-contradiction is a truth. He says it's a generalization from experience. There is literally nothing that we could... Yes, because he says
a priori.
he says that the limits of my imagination are not the limits of possibility. Now, in a way, in some cases, I think there is some merit into it, but I don't think that we can do that with, let's say, basic logical facts like the law of non-contradiction.
Yeah,
our entire mind would be destroyed.
But also, you can identify how that would be the case, because your sense perception could provide you with sensory inputs that are contradictory, and this happens all the time, where you see or hear something that just seems to be unbelievably out of place, and you can't explain it, and then it's gone, and you just think, okay, but what just happened? And it's not that there's anything wrong with your senses necessarily. So that you don't have a frame of reference for whatever just happened.
Exactly. Right? And I don't think that there is a problem with the senses. It's the problem with how we try to interpret
it's about
our senses.
Our understanding of the world at that period of time. And so it's not that, there are contradictions that our senses bring to us, But the failure must be on ourselves and our understanding rather than the world itself, right? And this is what the law of non-contradiction is saying. And this has to be a rational position. It has to be something we reason through a series of logical deductions and not something that we just experience in the world, because we'll experience contradictions in the world all the time. And so it's like, okay, well, so if you are in Mill's position where you refuse to believe that that's something that humans can do, well, I guess you'd end up with his perspective, but it's obviously the case.
And the other problem that I think a non-rationalist epistemology has is ethics. Because if we think that we can only be in contact with the world in a sensory manner, it's really weird thing to say that we can have sensory contact with moral truths. And here is where Hume's fact-value distinction comes into the picture. And Hume is really adamant about it, that we encounter a world of physical facts, and we encounter this world with the senses. We cannot derive a not from an is. Every time that we talk about morality, we do have a conclusion that it is moral, that has moral notions. We cannot derive that conclusion if there are no moral notions in the premises, and the senses can only give us premises that are that involve non-moral terms.
See, I don't know if I agree with this anymore. I think it was Bernard Williams who was his thick concepts really persuaded me on this, because there are some facts that are morally loaded.
Yes,
and we have a whole litany of words for them: betrayal, murder, all of these things. Like, it's a fact that this happened. It's also morally
thick concepts.
Yeah, it's all morally loaded, and we can't demoralize it.
Yes,
either. And so I don't know how much I agree with Hume on this at this point. But that's another big conversation.
I have
for another time.
Spoken to other people also who are empiricists, and they don't like this Humean picture.
No,
but that's the problem.
I wouldn't even necessarily call myself an empiricist either.
Yeah. I
don't want to commit to any one thing, because I think in a way we're kind of all things to some degree or another. But I can see why Hume has done this, but I think it's not entirely true.
Yeah. And so that's the thing. So it's not that someone who is a rationalist in the epistemic sense has no reasons for it. And very frequently there are reasons that, like the ones I mentioned, that, on the one hand, if we don't accept that we can have non-sensory means of knowledge that we call reason, our thought breaks down.
Because mathematics is a great example.
Yeah.
Pi. There is no sensory input that reveals pi, actually. It's entirely rationalistic, and yet it's obviously a universal truth of the entire universe.
And to talk about Mill again, Mill had this view that mathematics are generalizations from experience, and then we have people like Frege and Bertrand Russell who completely disagree with this, and they start operating in a different line that, in a way, it gave us computers, the way that they start, because Alan Turing was very much influenced by Bertrand Russell, Kurt Gödel, and this line of thinking. Okay, so the thing is, though, that back to rationalism, rationalism is a really big umbrella term. There is substantial disagreement even among rationalists about what reason is. So some people think, like Descartes, reason involves both intuition, the intuitive grasp of immediate truths, and deduction or inference. Others, like Spinoza, they talk of reason like being inferential, and he thinks intuition is a separate and higher form of knowledge. But the main theme is that it is non-sensory. And I would say that there are some other forms there is also substantial disagreement about the character of truths. That the character of knowledge, which is a priori, and there are two sentences. One is a priori knowledge is knowledge that is prior in the order of time. This is the Meno theory of innate truths that Plato changed. I think he revised it in the Republic. And then we also have the idea that a priori knowledge is knowledge that is prior in the order of justification, such as when we talk about the law of non-contradiction. So we could say that a rationalist can say that we require sense experience as being a necessary aspect of knowledge, but it's not sufficient to account for the entirety of knowledge.
Yeah.
And so, and there is substantial disagreement also about the reach of reason and the character of truths that it gives us.
So I don't want to be pedantic, but I can't help but feel that the term truth has to connect to the real world in some way.
Yes.
So an abstract calculation can never be true, although it could be correct, right? So, like the 75th decimal of pi isn't really true because it doesn't. I find myself thinking that truth has to be that which corresponds to reality. What's the name of the chap? The Polish chap.
You mean the logician?
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but I know who I'm talking about.
Oh, Tarski.
Tarski, that's it. Tarski's formulation. I find that he's just the most persuasive when it comes to what is truth, and it's that which corresponds to reality. And so to say that a calculation is true actually requires us to have some linkage to a sense datum, right? And so, because you would have to link it to something in the world, so it'd have to have come through your senses. But if it can be rationally calculated without any kind of sensory input whatsoever, can we really call it a truth,
Okay, yeah, no, this makes perfect sense. And I think I will answer in a conditional way.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I'm wrong.
Yeah, because I'm not really well versed in the philosophy of mathematics.
Right.
So
neither am I.
I want to say that because I don't want to... Yeah. I think it's conditional on what we understand reality to be, and and the domains of reality. So someone like a Platonist in mathematics would say that reality does have an abstract domain, and a calculation does talk about a truth that corresponds to reality in its abstract domain. If we deny that abstract domain, then there is a sort of problem with it. But there is a surprising, this is again an issue that I think many people cannot explain, how mathematics explains the world so well, and how, in a sense, physics does require mathematics to have explanatory power.
But that's the thing, isn't it? It's the direction of travel, because it seems to me now that there are people who are saying that it's not explanatory, it's almost normative or declarative.
Okay.
So it's not like, okay, why do the planets move in this way? Well, actually, I can create a formula that explains, but you're explaining reality there. And so the formula's correctness is only correct as long as it maps on accurately to the movement of the planet. But then it becomes extrapolated to, well, now we've got to make predictive claims about the future. And this is the power of science and mathematics. But look at the problems that this has created, as in predictions that are, it's very easy to say whether you're accurate or not when you're measuring something. But when you're predicting something, you have to take into account a series of factors of which you can't see or comprehend. And then it means that the predictive power of this is always, there's an element of interference through, and the bigger this gets, the wider the interference and the less accurate the predictions become, right? And so I'm wary about calling the mathematical things truths until they have accurately mapped on to the part of reality that they're making predictions about, right?
Okay.
And so I realize this sounds like a really petty point.
No, I don't think it's a petty point, because in a sense, you are demanding proof by those who are putting forward some generalizations.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.